day 546 of the Trump administration, and at the height of the hubbub over Helsinki, Donald Trump has invited Vladimir Putin to Washington this fall. As the New York Times and others have been saying, Trump long ago became the first American president even suspected of having any kind of loyalties or obligations to the leader of a foreign power, in this case, a full-on adversary who hacked our presidential election. And now the president has apparently doubled down. He apparently had his White House aide for national security extend the invitation to Putin. It was not shared, apparently, with those at the top of his administration. So witness this. Our own Andrea Mitchell was interviewing Dan Coats, who happens to be the director of national intelligence, in Aspen, Colorado this afternoon when the news broke, and it was immediately apparent it was news to him.
We have some breaking news. The White House has announced on Twitter that Vladimir Putin is coming to the White House in the fall.
Say that again?
Vladimir Putin coming
Did I hear you? Did I hear you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's going to be special.
The Associated Press reports Putin told Russian diplomats today the Helsinki meeting was successful. He has briefed his own diplomatic corps on the meeting. President Trump has not done the same. In that same interview today, DNI Coats in Aspen gave Andrea his assessment of the meeting in Helsinki.
Moments after the president appeared to be siding with Vladimir Putin over you personally, by name, you stood up and spoke out.
I just felt at this point in time that what we had assessed and reassessed and carefully gone over still stands, and that it was important to take that stand on behalf of the intelligence community. Obviously, I wished he had made a different statement.
In Helsinki, the president was alone with Vladimir Putin for 2 hours. More than 2 hours, with only translators. Basically, how do you know what happened? You were on the dark side of the moon. How do you have any idea what happened in that meeting?
Well, you're right. I don't know what happened in that meeting.
Is there a risk that Vladimir Putin could have recorded it?
That risk is always there.
Meanwhile, the White House has been in the process of trying to clarify another proposal that emerged at that Helsinki news conference. On Monday, you'll recall, the Russian president suggested a kind of trade. He would allow Robert Mueller to interrogate 12 Russian agents indicted for hacking our election if U.S. officials would allow Russians to question Americans that it suspects of interfering in Russian affairs. That would include our former U.S. ambassador to Russia. President Trump seemed at first to welcome the idea.
What he did is an incredible offer. He offered to have the people working on the case come and work with their investigators with respect to the 12 people. I think that's an incredible offer.
Yesterday, Sarah Huckabee Sanders indicated the incredible offer was still under consideration. She said the West Wing was actually discussing the matter. But today, as outrage over the suggestion grew, the White House released a statement that read in part, "It is a proposal that was made in sincerity by President Putin, but President Trump disagrees with it." Well, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo was more firm and less respectful in rejecting the proposal.
That's not going to happen. The administration is not going to force Americans to travel to Russia to be interrogated by Vladimir Putin and his team.
As all of this unfolds, NBC News is reporting Microsoft has discovered new attempts at election hacking similar to what took place in 2016, directed at 3 unnamed candidates running in the midterms. And the Wall Street Journal is reporting 3 of the FBI's highest-ranking cybersecurity officials are stepping down from their posts. One official says other experts are expected to leave soon. Late today, the Justice Department released a detailed report describing all their efforts to fight foreign interference in American elections. But our colleague in Washington, Ken Dilanian, reports it includes no major new policy initiatives, and there is no single official in the Trump administration in charge of preventing election hacking. The president, however, remains focused on his relationship with the trained KGB spy who now leads Russia.
Getting along with President Putin, getting along with Russia is a positive, not a negative. Right. Now, with that being said, if that doesn't work out, I'll be the worst enemy he's ever had. The worst he's ever had.
With that, let's bring in our leadoff panel on a Thursday night. Andrea Mitchell is with us fresh off her interview today. She, of course, is the NBC News chief foreign affairs correspondent and host of Andrea Mitchell Reports at noon Eastern weekdays on this network. She is in Aspen tonight, along with Jeremy Bash, former chief of staff at CIA and the Pentagon. And with us from Washington, Robert Costa, national political reporter for The Washington Post and moderator of Washington Week on PBS. So, Andrea, here we all were watching your interview as covered on this network on live television. It occurred to us in real time. This was nothing less than someone, at long last, in a way, putting his job on the line for the cause. Were you surprised at that? And were you equally surprised that he was in the dark in as much as he was, especially this invitation for Putin to come to Washington?
Well, that's the way President Trump operates. I've seen it with secretaries of state and other cabinet officials completely blindsided over and over again in the last 18 months by a decision from the president. And in fact, members of the White House staff often shut out of a decision that the president makes. That is what is so unique about this presidency. So I wasn't surprised that he did not know. I noticed on Friday, of course, when he gave that interview and spoke strongly against the Russians, what they were doing in cyber, that they were the worst cyber actors, that he was ramping up his criticism. And then on Monday, he very swiftly responded to the Trump-Putin comments, where specifically the president sided with Putin over, by name, Dan Coats and the intelligence assessment. And he very quickly came out with a statement while the president was getting on Air Force One, reasserting that consensus agreement, which he said today had been assessed and reassessed in the last 18 months and is still valid, that it was not just the Russians, but it was Vladimir Putin's Russians, that all things are decided by the former KGB spy master at the head of that country. So he was very clear, and he feels that that is his job, as he said, to stand up for the intelligence, that he is not he wants to keep politics out of the intelligence, and he is putting it all on the line. And I have to say, he replicated what Chris Wray did last night here in an interview with Lester. And these are two law enforcement and intelligence officials who really feel that they have to stand up for their agencies.
Andrea, this may call for an opinion on your part, but it was lost on none of us who could see you on live television that the White House communication shop, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, tweeted out the invitation to Putin while you're sitting there with the director of national intelligence, whose word the president seemed to go against last we saw in Helsinki. Accident, quirk of history, or not?
I am not in a position, especially at this distance, to know. I don't have the sourcing to know exactly what was going through their minds. Was it deliberate? Was it an accident? Was it incompetence? There's a lot of lack of communication in that shop, or has been. So I don't really know that. But I do know that a senior intelligence official tonight is pushing back very strongly against the Washington Post report, and perhaps Robert Costa can shed some clarity on this. The Washington Post reporting that people in the White House and the political side of the White House are saying that Dan Coats went rogue in this interview. And the senior intelligence official telling me that they just do not understand the role of intelligence, and that they don't realize that it is not supposed to be political. And it's also to be noted that Dan Coats came from the Senate. Twice he was elected from Indiana to the Senate, and that he has a lot of support and allies in the Senate. So he's not going to resign. If he's fired, I think he'd be very hard to replace.
All right, Robert Costa, your name was invoked clear from the Rocky Mountains. What say you about the reporting of the Post tonight and your reporting on just in general Republican action, from White House aides to aides on the Hill behind you to actual members of the House and Senate?
To pick up on Andrea's great points, roaming the halls of the Senate this week, Brian, you really get a sense of quiet alarm among Republicans. Senator Lindsey Graham told me, he said, speaking about Republicans, we have to bring Secretary Pompeo. We have to figure out, was there a deal cut? Senator Blunt of Missouri is telling me he's calling up cabinet members, trying to figure out what is going on. Is the president isolated? Is he getting the information he needs? And with Dan Coats, you have a director of national intelligence who isn't just some former backbench member of the Senate plucked from Indiana. No, this is a former ambassador to Germany, a former longtime member of the Senate Intelligence Committee. Senators I've spoken with, Republicans, say he's the canary in the coal mine. As Andrea said, he won't resign. But they're also really wondering about these political advisors at the White House. Are they even aware that the director's in Aspen? Are they aware that so many people in the administration appointed by President Trump feel like he is now making foreign policy without their interaction, without their guidance? That is a real story inside of this White House and this administration at this moment, based on my reporting.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.